Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be discussing Teddy Pendergrass, If You Don't Know Me. Teddy Pendergrass, If You Don't Know Me is an inspirational 2018 documentary directed by Olivia Lichtenstein about the life and career of the legendary R&B singer. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Teddy, as he was affectionately known, was one of the most successful musicians from the Philly soul era of the 1970s. After releasing a string of 5 platinum albums, plans were being put in place to capitalize on his equally good looks and to have Teddy cross over to the mainstream and movies to become an even bigger star. But an unfortunate accident at the age of 31 changed the course of his career in life. The documentary begins with clips and things like that from performances, Teddy Pendergrass songs, whatnot. But I'm not a very superstitious person, but Teddy Pendergrass's mother speaks about her experiences leading up to his birth. Having been pregnant, it sounds like either having miscarriages or something along those lines, like stillbirths. But whatever the case it was, going through, I think it was 7 pregnancies. And it sounds like he was either the 7th or 8th pregnancy, but up to that point, she'd been through the experience of being pregnant multiple times, but not carrying to term. Very sad and traumatic experience for a woman, for a family really, to go through. One time is bad enough, but to go through it multiple times, difficult. And so after trying multiple times, you now have this baby, carry to full term, give birth, and here's this little boy that I'm sure she loved and cherished all the more because of these past difficulties with pregnancies. It's mentioned, but I'm not sure if it was during the pregnancy or immediately following his birth, but Teddy's mother mentioned that her husband, which was Teddy Pendergrass' father, not really going into details, but left the family. Regardless of gender, it would be devastating, right? Children need the influence from both genders, right? So here it is that you have this boy growing up. Sure, he loves his mother and she loves him, but you still need your father. Being a young boy growing up in what sounds like a very rough neighborhood, you need that male example. Well, growing up in any neighborhood, you still need that male example to help you understand the experience of being a boy, becoming a young man, and then eventually a man. It's important for both genders. I think you need both the masculine and feminine, like examples from both of those genders to understand your own manhood, your own womanhood, how to relate to other people, to see positive examples of relationships as far as how you should treat your partner, how you in turn should expect to be treated. Teddy's mom raised him in the church, which I think is common with a lot of the people that would become like soul and R&B singers. Those who emerged during this period. Church was just a large part of Black life at that point in time. And so there's some explanation as to what the environment, what the neighborhood was like. It was rough, and from a very young age, he was walking to school on his own, to and from kindergarten, having to go through 2 different gang territories. And from his perspective, which I agree with, it's what had to be done. It's the sacrifice that had to be made. And through that, it instilled some degree of independence in him from what was actually a very young age. So Teddy also distinguished himself from a very young age as being an incredible singer. His mother speaks about the pride that she felt in seeing him get up on stage, hearing him perform in public for the first time, and the reaction that he received from the crowd. It was a very nice touch, including his mom in the documentary. People are raised as they're raised in their parents' home, but when you get out there on the streets, it's something else. So he was certainly raised in the church, but having to grow up in this rough neighborhood, you have other influences. And so eventually he started cutting school to go to a theater to see artists perform. And so here it is that you have this combination of 2 worlds, right? This natural ability to sing and him being exposed to gospel music within his mother's church. But then within the neighborhood, you have those musical influences. There was a pivotal moment, he mentions, of seeing Jackie Wilson perform, where prior to that, he had an interest in the entertainment industry. But seeing Jackie Wilson perform and the response that he got from the audience sealed it for Teddy that this is definitely what he wanted to do with his life. So, taking a step away from the story for just a second, I never really understood this thing of throwing your underwear on stage. It's gross, right? But how exactly does this work? Are you bringing extra underwear to throw? Are you throwing the underwear you have on? Who was the first person that did this? Was it like your Nana or your Meemaw was at like a Louis Armstrong show, decided to throw their underwear up on stage? It just sounds so insane to me. And so they're talking, there's a scene where they're talking about women throwing their underwear up on stage. And Teddy speaks about being a kid and seeing women do this, like just lose it at the Jackie Wilson concert. And so seeing that, he wanted it for himself. And then here it is years later, there's a clip of him standing on stage and someone throws something, right? He catches it and it looks like it's underwear. And it's like, this is like his dream as an entertainer. He's now on stage and he's the one that women are throwing their underwear at. It is completely disgusting. So I knew of Teddy Pendergrass and I knew of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes and, you know, the Philly soul sound, all that kind of stuff. When I came across the documentary, it piqued my interest, right? And within it, you see Gamble and Huff speaking about music of the time, how things came together, what was going on in Philly. And so in a sense, this is like an origin story of an individual who will go on to be a legend. But I first became aware of him through the adults around me listening to his music when I was a kid. So I came across this video, I Miss You, years ago on YouTube. I knew the lead singer with the perm was Teddy Pendergrass, but I didn't understand what was going on. Who was Harold Melvin, right? The guy with the perm was Teddy Pendergrass, but who's really the lead singer? And so it's explained here how that came about, where the Blue Notes, as they were known, was a group. Teddy was a part of it. It sounds like him and some friends or people he knew from high school. And within the group, there was this guy, Harold Melvin. They started out being just the Blue Notes. Teddy Pendergrass, not to say the other guys couldn't sing, but I think everyone gives credit that he was the defining voice of the Blue Notes. And so because of his voice standing out, it seems that Harold Melvin wanted to make sure that it was a way for him to recapture some of that attention. And so it sounds like he was like a strategist, kind of like the businessman within the group. And this is something that you see throughout music history, not just with Black artists, but especially with Black artists, this thing of being taken advantage of early in their career. For some people, it's unfortunate. They might have a moment or two where even sometimes their career doesn't really take off because they kind of get bogged down by these financial issues being taken advantage of. You have other artists who were fortunate. They might kind of go through those same growing pains early on in their career, but eventually they hit a point where it's like their talent just can't be denied. They end up breaking free of those people from early in their career who were taking advantage of them. And then hopefully at some point in time, they kind of also get on top of their business. They start making the kind of money that they should. And fortunately, we see that happens here. So I previously heard this story, but it's mentioned here as well, where Teddy and the other guys were staying in like, it sounds like a raggedy, or maybe just a regular hotel room. And so Teddy goes to see Harold, and he's in like this really dope hotel suite. He's got all this money and whatnot. There's a clear difference in how the two factions of the band are living, right? And with that, it motivated Teddy Pendergrass to really get on his business. And this is something that I noticed with these kind of people, right? Like these Harold Melvins. Not taking anything away from them. They have a talent. It might not necessarily be creative, or they might not have what it takes to be the front man or to be the artist or musician, but it seems to be an ego thing where they want that attention. They want the crowd going crazy for them as well, but being unable to capture that attention, maybe it's like a jealousy kind of thing towards the person that becomes the star. And with that, they end up shooting themselves in the foot, where it's like, you're making a lot of money off of this person. Treat them well, treat them fairly. And with that talent, you'll be able to make money with them for a long time. But instead, they just try to get over, right? They just try to take advantage. And so the artist, the star, either ends up smartening up or they get tired of the nonsense. And quite often, because of their talent, they're able to go on and in some instances reach even higher levels of success. So it's like, he could have been a part of Teddy Pendergrass, the independent solo singer, but instead he was greedy, and it ended up resulting in Pendergrass leaving the group. It seems like a missed opportunity. My mom has a saying of, it's better to eat small and eat for a longer amount of time than to take a big bite and starve. It's like this idea of slow money versus fast money, where fast money comes in, but it also leaves quickly, whereas slow money tends to stick around. So there's this YouTube video of them performing I Miss You at like a club, and Teddy Pendergrass is just like sweating away in this video. I don't know if it's a wig or he had his hair permed or whatever it was, if it was the look of the time. It was like this bob thing, and it was terrible, and he was just like sweating, and it's like sticking to him. It's like one of those embarrassing type videos, right? And it's sort of like that clip with Al Green performing on Soul Train, and like the halter top with hot pants, a hat, and a purse. But that was different because he still managed to look incredibly masculine. It's like, here are these old clips where it's like, they probably thought they were just like killing it back then. And you look back at them now and it's like, you didn't have friends because they let you go out on stage like this. So they show a clip of them on Soul Train performing I Miss You. And at first glance, it looks like they have on some regular sweatsuits. Not the end of the world until you take a closer look. And it's like the jacket isn't a regular tracksuit jacket. It's like that 70s chest open medallion look. The guy in the middle, his jacket has like some convenient cutouts where it's like his pecs and his nipples are showing. Everyone has like an afro. You've got one guy with the thick sideburns, and then you look at Teddy Pendergrass, and I don't know what was going on with his hair, if it was a perm, if it was curled, if it was a wig. I wonder if people back then, when these guys were like up on stage performing in these outfits, were they looking at them and like, what on earth are they wearing? Or were they looking at them like, I'm going to get one of those outfits one of these days? Like, what were people in Philly and around the world, like Black America, who watched Soul Train? Were they just clamoring to get like this nipples out jacket, or like Teddy Pendergrass's curled up hair, this thing that he had going on? Something that I think is actually really cool is that, like most other documentaries, it features commentary and clips from interviews with people that knew Teddy Pendergrass. This obviously wasn't planned, but I think it was really cool that Pendergrass also recorded a series of tapes of him like telling his life story, going back to his childhood, explaining things along the way. So you hear from other people, but you also hear from him in his own words, describing being a kid, being part of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. It's like his life in his words, like his perspective of what was going on, how he was feeling. And so that just adds another layer to the story, because by the time the documentary was made, Teddy Pendergrass had already passed away. And you can certainly tell a story without the subject, right, being involved or after someone's passed away. But in this case, it adds something to hear him speak about his life up to this point, right? It's like, it's his life and his words. It adds something different. So here it is, you get together with some school friends, you get discovered, you're performing, you're excited, but you're not making money. And then comes the inevitable breakup. Things kind of take a turn at this point, where it's not just from a legal aspect of trying to get out of contracts and things like that. I actually sat up and took notice at this point, because up to here, it's like, regular, nothing really going on. But the point where he leaves the Blue Notes and goes solo, the tone and vibe kind of shifted, right? The energy changed. And I realized that there would be more such problems and issues later on in the documentary. At the time, Teddy had a girlfriend named Taz, who was also serving as his manager. Here you have this thing again of not being on top of your business. Him getting out of one contract and getting into a new situation with a contract that was really exploitative. For someone to take advantage of you like that, I could see you being upset, because it sounds shady, especially for this person to be your girlfriend. She's like, kind of controlling everything, and he wants to get out of that situation as well. So they're traveling to do a show, they're out of town, and get word from back in Philly that the girlfriend/manager had been shot in the head. Sounds a little bit convenient, highly questionable. I was actually surprised that they touched on it, but then again, they don't really shy away from uncomfortable topics. Never mind that he's the subject of the documentary. They don't try to push you towards one perspective or, one opinion or the other, but rather the information is presented, whether good, bad, in between, however it makes it look. And they leave it up to the audience to draw their own conclusions. This isn't just a documentary about the finer points of Teddy Pendergrass and his music. It's not like a surface level documentary. They were quite balanced in the approach here, right? Where they touched on even some of these controversial moments from his life. And it's like, sure, they discussed the rumors and things like that, but stated at that and left it up to you as the audience to figure things out. The girlfriend gets shot. He's out of town, so it's obvious that Pendergrass didn't shoot her, but it was believed in some corners that arrangements might have been made, right? That he wasn't necessarily too upset about her untimely demise, as he actually benefited from it. It removed her from being involved with his business and getting a cut of his money. And so with that, there's like a brief discussion of the Philadelphia underworld, some of the shadowy figures and organizations with which he might have had a relationship, no matter how fleeting. And so as part of this, there's quite an honest discussion about Teddy Pendergrass as a person, the complexities of his character, having been abandoned by his father, not really acknowledged really by his father, having only met him twice in his life, right? The second time was his father now laying in a casket. It's one thing if your parent happens to pass away before your birth or shortly thereafter during your childhood versus them choosing not to be there. It's something that affected him emotionally as well as like his developing with his father being absent from his life. You don't really hear about any other male figures or family members that stepped up. It seemed like for all intents and purposes, it was mostly just his mother. And this is something that we see quite often with a lot of young men, where not having their fathers around, just being raised by their mother, not to say that you're going to grow up to be a bad person, but I think if your father isn't around for whatever reason, you need male role models to pattern yourself behind, right? To develop a healthy sense of masculinity and manhood, right? I think really for both genders. And so here it is, you're getting into this industry where you now have all these women throwing themselves at you. And it's mentioned that he was a very complex individual. He could be very nice, very kind and things like that, but he also had a tremendous ego and could be difficult to get along with, as well as it sounds like he was quite the womanizer. It sounds more like he was the guy that men wanted to be rather than them being jealous of him. He got a lot of love from just about seemingly everyone in Philly except for the cops. It's not something that I was expecting to hear, right? The open harassment that he endured. Often it seems like once you reach a certain level of success as a Black person, it's like, to a degree, you kind of escape some of the day-to-day things that Black people experience with the police and some of these other individuals. But here it is that you have where they were just giving him a hard time. And they share a story going back to his childhood, his adolescence, where he was arrested by the cops because he resembled someone that did something, right? It sounds like he wasn't really involved in the incident, just happened to be passing by. And so the police hauled him into court. He was sentenced to like 5 months in juvenile hall or detention or something like that. And it's like, imagine having something like that happen to you, what that would do to you. The judge asked, like, why did he run if he didn't do anything wrong? And it might be difficult for people from other communities to understand. But as a Black person, when things are going down, the police are not always necessarily the people you want to run to for help. When you've seen examples of people being victimized by the police, people being attacked by the police, not getting protection, they don't always look like a source of safety or a safe haven as they might for other people. Now, he's not a saint or anything like that. It sounds like he was partying hard, probably into some less than savory stuff, but he wasn't out there robbing, stealing, selling drugs, or carrying on crazy or anything like that. But because of this success in the music industry, because of him having this very visible presence in the community, and seemingly the perception or the expectation for Black people, for Black men and such, for him to be going against the grain, it sounds like it made some of the local police officers uncomfortable or even really jealous is probably more accurate. And so when the opportunity would present itself, they would harass him. When you have musicians and entertainers from your town, especially when they're very successful, I think people tend to show a lot of love, right? Or I would hope that people from your city, from your neighborhood and whatnot, that they feel a certain pride in you, right? So I understood them having this person be from your city, where you and or some of your family members might have known them or at least seen them around the way, to now see them achieve such success, it would fill you with pride, right? You might not know them personally. It's not your best friend, but having watched their career, it's devastating to then see them suffer, tragedy. So in this case, seeing the photos of the car from his accident, the wreckage, right? The clips of him being loaded into the ambulance. And here I am now, decades into the future, where it's years after all of this stuff is unfolded, and I know how it's going to turn out. They explain the experience of being at the hospital. The doctors coming in to speak to his mom and his family and friends, letting them know the severity of his injuries. Do you feel their devastation? The success he had was fine, but then having plans to go to an even higher level, he had the looks, he had the voice, he had the charm. The plan was for him to start to cross over and eventually to have him become just an overall ageless celebrity, for him to not just be a tremendously successful Black musician, but to just be a successful musician across like the board, and to possibly get into movies, other areas of entertainment. To have something like this happen and just upset all those plans, as an ambitious person, as a creative person, as an entrepreneurial person with big dreams and all of that, I felt the devastation. Typically, I don't give credence to conspiracy theories, mostly because a lot of times they sound like nonsense and the people that utter them tend to be space cadets. But it was a brand new Rolls Royce that he was driving, and he'd pretty much been having problems with the car from the moment he got it. You might have a flat this or that goes wrong with the vehicle, just normal wear and tear. It's something completely different when you have multiple cars and find your brake lines have been cut. Going back to the things that he'd experienced early in his career, like threats around the time he was trying to leave the Blue Notes, the street elements and whatnot being involved in his career. I understand the feeling, the sense that some people had that this accident was not necessarily an accident. It's rumored that he had some athlete's wife or girlfriend or something along those lines in the car. Also, a transgendered person was in the car. Rumors, some of it untrue, but it was interesting to get an explanation of some of those potential conspiracy theories. It's one thing when you might be a hot artist, you put something out there, it tanks, your career begins to decline. People used to get excited about seeing you, and now you're like old news. But you still have your life. You still have your health. It's like in the grand scheme of things, I would consider those things to be more important. Even if you're no longer in entertainment, you can find some kind of job and make a living for yourself. It's something completely different when your career changes because you're dealing with very serious medical issues, where the things we take granted, like being able to walk, being able to feed yourself, for someone who sounds like they were a very independent person, to now have no choice but to be dependent on the people around you would be devastating in and of itself. But dealing with that, with the added pressure of being in the public eye, would just add to the difficulty. You've had this huge team around you that had been eating off of you, be that record labels, different professionals, the companies that sponsor you. And here it is, when you were up and things were going great, you had all these people in your corner. Now that you've experienced this setback, things have changed, and for the most part, they've abandoned you. In the midst of trying to recuperate physically, there's also the mental toll of dealing with this situation. Because by this point, so much of your identity is wrapped up in your career. To have people abandon you like that, I could only imagine how heartbreaking it must feel. By this point, he'd had 3 children. He was a very successful individual. It's not clear like how much albums he was selling. I think like they were going platinum. But he was having like really big shows. He had a team around him. If you're making, let's say, $100, even if you live in a $90 lifestyle and you're saving $10, if you lose that source of income, that's $100, right? That's how you make money. It suddenly goes all away. If you save that $10 for 9 years, you should be able to, survive for a year while you figure things out. But at this point where you're making millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars and it suddenly comes to a halt, you still have those original expenses, but now also this added expense of having to care for your rehabilitation and care. the financial toll, the financial devastation that it could cause you would be unimaginable. Realistically, we all know that we're going to die someday. You can have an accident, this or that could go wrong, but how many of us are anticipating that we have a car accident and now have to figure out our care? We now have to figure out how we're going to take care of our responsibilities while at the same time trying to learn how to navigate this new world and experience. I never really considered the depression that people might feel when they go through situations like this, where you have people talk about feeling hopeless, like what's the point of living, wanting to kill themselves. And then it's like the pressure of having these people around you whose careers are dependent on you and whose livelihoods are dependent on you. How do you deal with that pressure when you're pretty much just trying to figure out how to adjust and live within your new physical reality? And you have all of this other stuff going on as well. This was a documentary that I just happened to put on and decided to watch. I knew of Teddy Pendergrass, but I didn't know the complexities of his life. I found the story of his accident and its aftermath, him having to adapt to life after going from being like suicidal to finding ways to cope. Adapting to this tremendous change in his life was incredibly inspiring. All of this happened before I was born, so I knew of him and his situation, but I didn't realize that the degree to which he struggled after the accident, undergoing rehab and things like that, sure, but the emotional devastation, the psychological devastation of his accident, I knew about none of that. And so watching the documentary with its highs and lows, twists and turns, this like air of danger, it was incredible. I look at it like this story of Teddy Pendergrass could be an incredible movie if well done. The success that he achieved as a male artist geared towards females, or very much geared towards females, but that men liked as well, would be good. The story of his accident, his rebirth after, is incredibly inspirational. I felt such loss for this man, right? Like, I knew of him as an artist, but watching and hearing him speak about his experience after the accident, the difficulty of adjusting to life as a paraplegic was incredibly moving. It's a story that I think more people should know of because it's motivational. It's an incredible documentary. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website by the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more movie recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist.